Hello and welcome back to Hacktivity 2019. We have a few announcements first. If you have a badge and a VIP band, please remember to pick up your hoodie and your t-shirt from downstairs. If you have an electronic badge, please update the firmware on your badge. Be sure to have a look at the Hacker Rank game in the Morgan Stanley booth, and the Black Cell booth is very interesting with a display on vulnerabilities of security. Please could you welcome Andrea Pierini to talk about Who Am I? PRIV, show me your privileges and I will lead you to system.
Hello to everyone. Hope it continue to work, finger crossed. You can see it, okay? So first of all, it's a real pleasure for me to be here for this amazing event, and I would like to thank the organization for giving me this great opportunity. Just 2 words about me before starting. Among the other things, I work like an IT architect and security manager for an Italian company. I come from Italy, and security has always been a special interest for me since the early 19th, so I'm a little bit old. To be honest, offensive security is much more a hobby for me, and during my spare time when I'm not cycling or diving, I like to understand and sometimes discover some security issues in Windows and Linux environments. These are my contacts, and I am a proud member of these 2 organizations. First of all, why this talk? Because my talk is about Windows privileges. I don't know how many of you know about Windows privileges. I think it's a well-known argument, but we will introduce it. Because I started my research, not so much research, but to understand better privileges because these techniques, I found that they were not so much exploited, not much taken in consideration when it comes to privilege escalation. So some techniques or manipulation are not well documented, and I decided to dig deeper. One day I ran in this fantastic article which was a perfect resume of privileges, and I shared useful information with the authors of this paper. The agenda, after a small, very short introduction, we will see in more detail some very interesting privileges, some powerful privileges which are called God privileges, and then how to use them, and then some final thoughts. Sorry for my bad English. I hope you understand me, but as Italian, I always speak with my hands, and maybe this can help you to understand me better. I don't want to bore you with privileges and theory, so first of all, I will spend just 2 words about it. What are privileges? Privileges, as Microsoft says, are a special rights granted to users to perform some high privileged operations on the operating system, such as shutting down the system, changing the system time, and so on. In Windows environments, some users and groups have already predefined privileges. Obviously, administrator system has all privileges, not all privileges, but most of them. Some users have special privileges. They can be assigned or managed via the security edit console of the GP edit from Microsoft, but you can also play with privileges using directly the native APIs. Another interesting thing to mention is that some privileges totally overwrite the permission which I set to an object, and this is very, very cool. Another thing is that the most God privileges are only available in high integrity level process, in a high shell process. Otherwise, you won't see these privileges. This is the first thing that we should do, try to spawn a high integrity level process like the CMD shell, and if we are able to spawn it, probably we have some privileges. How do we discover our privileges? Simply with WHOAMI/PRIV. Windows Access Tokens, why I speak about Windows Access Token? Because they are closely linked, privileges and tokens, because privileges are assigned to the token when I log on to the system, because when I log on to the system, a special token will be assigned to me, and each time I spawn a process or a thread, a copy of this token will be made. What does this token contain? A lot of information. Group memberships, and so on. Interesting is that in the token is included the list of privileges which are granted to me. So when I have a token with elevated privileges, if I can impersonate this token, I will automatically have all these privileges. A token can be of different types. Again, I don't want to bore you. Primary impersonation token, a primary token is mainly used for spawning processes, and impersonation token for spawning threads. It's a little bit more complicated, but keep it simple. The only useful type of token for us are the last two ones, security impersonation or security delegation token. These are the only two types of tokens we can abuse from. The other tokens are very beautiful, have a lot of privileges, but we cannot use them. Important thing is that once a token has been generated from the logon process, the primary token frozen bit will be set. This means that I cannot add other privileges to my token. Otherwise, it would be too simple to elevate my privileges, no? But I can change the token. I can duplicate the token, and for example, from a primary token, create an impersonation token in order to impersonate the thread, for example. Okay, that's it. Everything is clear up to now? Yeah? Okay, good. Which account have special privileges? As I told you before, obviously, administrator, local system, they have God privileges. They are the God on the machine. Some built-in users group, for example, backup operators have backup and restore privilege. Printer operators have the load driver privilege on a domain controller. Local and network service accounts, they have always impersonate and sometimes assign primary privileges. And we will see that this is very, very interesting one. Also managed service and virtual accounts, third-party application users, because in order to use and install some applications, the software vendors ask us to grant to the user which will impersonate this application to grant him special privileges. Or sometimes, and it really happens, you can believe me, some misconfigured users which have been granted unnecessary privileges. So if you are able to compromise an account of such a misconfigured users, you have done, without compromising the admin account, for example. For example, this backup program, backup exec, requires for the user who launches the program, obviously backup and restore privilege, because it's his task, but also the act as part of operating system, the TCP privilege. Granting these privileges means granting to this user the complete control over the system. So, okay, we have to separate the risk, the duties, we have to grant only to the users the right privileges to perform the task. But given to a user this privilege is like telling him, here are the keys of the kingdom, do whatever you want. How can we count these privileged accounts? Well, there are so many techniques and I don't want to speak about it, but simply misconfigured service which I can impersonate, or simple remote code execution via a CMD shell on IIS server, or command execution via MS SQL, and so on, intercepting man-in-the-middle attacks, so NTLM authentication, or stealing credentials, Kerberoasting, etc., etc. Another important thing to get these privileges is to abuse from exploits. In the past, there have been many exploits which manipulates the tokens, and especially the last two techniques, partial write and arbitrary writes, are very, very interesting because they permit a normal user from the user land to overwrite the e-process structure in kernel mode, okay, and to add to himself other privileges. And these techniques are successfully being demonstrated, like the first one, and the other one we will show you is the load driver privilege. Okay, let's start with the privileges. The first one, and probably the most common and most well-known, is the debug privilege. The debug privilege simply grants you to attach your debugger to any process. When I say any process, also administrator or system process. Obviously, this is the simplest way to elevate, to make privilege escalation. Debug processes, the privilege of debug normally should be granted to developers, okay? But sometimes this is not always the case. And if you have this privilege, you can attach and you can write code, your own shell code, for example, in a process which is running with a high privilege. There are so many techniques from write process, create remote thread, and so on. These are well documented, so it's only important to say that with these debug privileges, as written here, a guy from Microsoft more than 10 years ago said, if you grant somebody the debug privilege, you gave away the farm because you grant him all privileges. He is the system on this machine. Another interesting way to exploit the debug privilege without making it too complex with creating remote threads, etc., etc. It's simply setting the parent process, creating a process, and setting the parent process of my process a privileged process. And in this manner, I will impersonate the user who is the owner of the parent PID. There are many ways to do it. The simple API calls. I wrote some time ago a PowerShell script, you can find it on my GitHub, which does this exactly, which spawns, sets the parent process, a privileged process. You can choose which is the PID you want to set as parent process, and as you can see in the screenshot, a simple user becomes system. And he also can become trusted installer, because if I take the PID of the trusted installer, I can impersonate trusted installer, which is very, very dangerous. The restore privilege, we are performing backup. So we need to backup and restore, and we need special privileges in order to override the permission sets which are set on object. If a file is accessible only by a special group or administrator, a backup operator could not access this file, okay? But if he has restore or backup privilege, he can override these security settings. So there are two API calls which I can use with these privileges in order to perform these nasty things. The first one is create file, and I only have to specify a special flag with this file flag backup semantics. So if I'm doing some operations, Windows checks if the flag, if I'm doing some operation, I want to access a file which I could not access, Windows checks if I have this flag active and I have the right privilege, please go on, I won't stop you, okay? And the same thing, I can do it on the registry keys, so I can overwrite registry keys, okay? So I can write files everywhere, even in System32, even files owned from trusted installer, and as you can imagine, there are countless possibilities. So the restore privileges, if I have a restore privilege, gaining system rights is just as drinking a bottle of good Italian wine, okay? I have just an example, but just of one of the many examples to show you how to perform this task. For example, I will modify a service configuration, and in this case, it's the WHOAMI push message routing service, which is present on each Windows installation starting from 2016, if I don't, yes, 2016. This service is interesting because a standard user can start the service, okay? Because obviously, even if I have all the rights on the service, I can override the service, but if I cannot launch it, I have no possibilities. So, what's the idea? First of all, I create a simple service DLL, which will run a batch file, and these batch files I will spawn a reverse shell, okay? And then I will overwrite the service configuration, telling him that the service DLL is not the service DLL, the original service DLL, but the service DLL which I will copy in system32 directory. This is possible because I use the backup semantic flag, the restore flag in this case. After that, I copy the DLL. I could even overwrite the original DLL because even if it's owned by a trusted installer, I am performing a backup operation and I can overwrite everywhere. I have also a short video about this. I hope it will work. I have restore privilege. I created a simple executable, but could also be a script in which I will modify a registry key and will overwrite the file and then launch my service. And I get the reverse back shell, and as you can see, I am system, so it's very, very easy to do, to implement. Back to us. The backup privilege is very similar. It's the opposite, but it's very similar. I can perform backup operation. This means that I can access file for backup purpose, which normally I could not access. One interesting thing is obviously to dump the hash of the local NTLM database. I can do it in many ways. In this way, I am doing it now with simply operating system commands, the reg utility, which allows me to perform a backup if I have backup privileges. So I will simply backup copy the system hive, and then with one of the tools, in this example, Mimikatz, I will dump the hashes and obtain the hash of administrator, for example. I can read files everywhere. In this case, I can read a file which only administrator can access, always with the special flag. And then obviously copy it elsewhere. Members of backup operators can access the domain controller to perform backups. So, as a backup operator, without other privileges or other groups, I can start a backup operation, dump the NTDS database, and then obtain the hashes. In this first example, I use VS admin, which is a utility with Windows, but you have to install it, okay? And then with one of the tools available, in this case I'm using DS internals, I get the boot key and then obtain the hashes from administrator dumping the database NTDST, the Active Directory database. Or I can do it, I don't know how many of you know this utility. It's this shadow. The shadow, unlike VSS, permits to perform operations even if you are not administrator. So I can make a backup of the NTDS database with this shadow, copy it in another location, and then perform the dump of the hashes. If you have backup and restore privileges, you are a member of the backup operators group, there is another interesting opportunity because you can set permission on each object, even if you can't do it, okay? And this is very cool. And as you can see here, via PowerShell, I have this folder which only admin has full control and no one else has other access. As a backup operator, I can change the permission and add myself full control, grant to myself full control to this directory. This is what I call a very special bonus given to the backup operators. Very similar is this one, the take ownership privilege. What does this privilege say? This privilege grants you the possibility to take ownership of file. Probably you see it also in the GUI interface of the Explorer of Windows. You can take ownership of a file. This is what a user with this special privilege can do, okay? Again, two simple API calls, set security info or set named security info. In the first one, I will pass him the handle of the object I want to take ownership. In the second case, the name of the object. Objects can be of any type, not only file, but of any type. How could we use this for privilege escalation? The concept is the same like the restore privilege, but first of all, I have to take ownership of the registry key of the service I wish to modify. When I took ownership of this registry key, I will grant to myself, or for the sake of simpleness, to everyone full control on this registry key, and then I will alter the, for example, the executable part of this service. In this case, the MSI service. I will let him launch another executable which can contain my malicious code. Should be here, okay? I take the ownership with the owner, with this flag, owner security information. Obviously, I have to the right privilege. And then once I took the ownership, using some API calls, I will set the permissions on this key, grant to everyone the full permission on this key, and then change the configuration of the service. Start the service, and voila, I'm again system, because obviously this service, I have to choose a service which runs with a high privilege, system administrator, and so on. Okay, this one, as I mentioned to you before, is a special privilege. Normally, administrator doesn't have this one. You have to grant him this special privilege. These privileges, Microsoft says, act as operating system. What this mean? Okay, what does this mean exactly? Well, with these privileges, a user is authorized to act as another user without specifying credential, and to grant to this user other special privileges or group memberships. So imagine, if I have this privilege, I can log on as another user or as myself, and tell to this function, LSA logon user function, using the S4U logon service, tell to this function, hey, put me in the administrator group and grant me the debug privilege. And this is possible because I have this special privilege, okay? So, and LSA logon user gives me back my precious token, my ARM token, my very powerful token, but we have a problem because I have this token, so I would like to spawn a process or a thread using this token. Otherwise, what should I do with this token? We have a problem. In order to impersonate the thread, I need a special privilege, which is the impersonate privilege. But if I only have TCP privilege, in theory, I could not impersonate the thread. So I have this token, and I can do anything with it. But there is good news. There is this statement which says that impersonate privileges is not needed as long as the token is for you, the user and the owner of the token is myself, and the integrity level of the process or the thread I want to spawn is less or equal as my integrity level as the parent process, okay? This is what we need But Microsoft, starting from Windows 10, added more constraints. Really? Really? In this case, I just need to respect the original constraint. And as you can see, I created a token for my user with two powerful memberships, which are the where are they? The backup operators, okay? And what I did, what is this possible? Because as long as the authentication ID of the originating of the resulting token equals the S4U token or origin ID, all other checks will be bypassed. And when I create a token with the TCP privilege, these two conditions always match. So even if Microsoft adds other constraints, what wins is this one. And with the TCP privilege, I can impersonate the thread without problems. This is what I wanted to say, okay? I will show you just some examples on how to abuse from these privileges. In the first one, we will use the Kerberos authentication domain, okay? And with this privilege, I will impersonate domain admin. In the other two, I will use NTLM authentication, okay? And in the first one, I will create a token for myself and add myself the debug privilege. In the other example, I will create a token for administrator and then act myself in a local administrator group. Using C# and Kerberos authentication is very, very easy. As you can see, only two lines of code, and I'm able to write in a protected directory as the user, which is not admin, but has the TCP privilege, because I assume the identity of domain admin. Very, very easy. In the other one, I can alter, using NTLM authentication, I can alter the username parameter, myself or administrator, put me in extra groups, for example, in administrator group, call my function, my API call, and the resulting token, H4U token, will have all the privileges to do what I want it to do. For example, in the left side, adding me a supplementary privilege, or adding me directly to the local administrator group. I have also a video about this, because maybe I was not so clear. But I would like to show you another video, because this is more a joke I made with my sysadmin colleagues, because we made a bet, and I told them, I log on as a local administrator on a machine, on a Windows server, act as a guest account, so impersonate a guest account, and act as the domain admin. They told me, you are crazy, it's not possible. We make a bet of a good Italian bottle of wine, and when I showed them that it was possible, the day after I was drunk. So the guest account is disabled, I'm local administrator. Now I launch my magic program, silly program, okay? And now I am guest. But the cool thing is that if I make a WHOAMI/groups, I belong to the domain admin group. Is this true, or is it just a joke? Because they didn't believe me. Okay, I will read a file where only local administrators have the possibility to read. As you can see, only administrator can access this file, and if I can act as administrator, I can see the contents of this file, okay? It was more a joke, but just to show you what sort of nasty things you can do with this privilege. allora, we were here. The create token privilege is also considered a God privilege because, as the word says, if I have this privilege, I can create a token. I can create a token, and I create a token like I want, with all the memberships, the privileges I want to have. This is very, very useful and powerful, as you can imagine. But again, here we have a problem, because even if I create this token, I cannot impersonate it, because I don't have the rights to impersonate. But, as I told you before, if the integrity level of the process is less or equal, etc., I can impersonate it. But this is not more true, because starting from Windows 1809 and Windows Server 2019, extra controls were made in place, which blocks this possibility. And as you can see, I have this powerful token with membership of trusted installer, okay? So it's a very, very powerful token. But if I try to, for example, write a file in System32 directory, I get an access denied. Exactly, the impersonation level is invalid. What does this mean? That probably Windows checks what you are wanting to do, and if you are trying to impersonate a token, even if you don't have impersonation privileges, and this token is considered a God token, and in this case, yes, because it has the membership of trusted installers, it will demote the token to an identification token, which is a very beautiful token, but is useless. I can't do anything with it. So, game over? Not exactly. Because if you do this dirty trick, you set the logon ID to anonymous and not to system, and with the create token API, you can set the authentication ID of the token. You set it to anonymous ID. Magically, it works. Not all API call works, but some works, and it's sufficient for us to make privilege escalation. Why this? Because probably the checks which Windows made are too late. If Windows see that the token is anonymous, probably thinks, oh, it's an anonymous token, it's harmless, let's go on. No, because this token has powerful memberships. And so it's possible to do it. I noticed this to Microsoft, and they say, oh yeah, you are right, that's true, but we are not going to fix it in the current release. So enjoy, okay? This is the API call. 5 minutes. I have to. I can go on, or very shortly, the load driver privilege. Load driver privilege is also a special privilege which is granted to load drivers, and normally printer operators on the domain controller have this powerful privilege. What can we do with this privilege? Load a driver, assign driver, obviously, but to have some bugs, and then exploit this bug in order to gain a system shell, for example. You have to trick the driver, the Windows kernel, to load the driver from a different location, not from the system hive, because as a printer operator, even if I have the load driver privilege, I cannot write in the system hive. So I will create the configuration of this device under my HKKey current user hive, and then tell to the load driver API that he has to load it from my hive, and this works. And I am able to load the driver. For example, here I loaded successfully this driver. This is a vulnerable driver of the Stopzilla. Stopzilla is an anti-malware utility which had a serious bug. And using this bug and a modified version of the exploit, I was able to load the driver, grant me the create token privilege, okay, and then add myself to the administrator group, just for example. The last two one, impersonation and assigned primary privileges. These are very, very powerful because they are more easier to obtain, because if you compromise a service account, you have these privileges, impersonate and assigned primary. What can you do with these privileges? A lot of things. You have to obtain a token, a powerful token, and then impersonate this token. These are the dangers of impersonate and assigned primary privileges. How can we obtain this token? For example, forcing a privileged process to write into a name pipe under my control. Impersonate name pipe, and then I have the token, impersonate it, and I am system, for example. Or via a security context in NTLM authentication, we will see it later, or via DCOM RPC callbacks, co-impersonate client, RPC impersonate client, okay? The killer exploit for these privileges is the rotten potato exploit. You know it? Everybody knows it? Never heard about it? Okay, in short, it's a little bit complicated. If you initialize a DCOM object running as an out-of-process server, like bits, for example, if you initialize this object via a fake storage object, and you can tell him that all the oxide resolving has to be done under an endpoint under your control. So when the object has been initialized, it will contact the oxide resolver, which is not no more running on port 135, but on a listener under my control, intercept the local NTLM authentication, this is why it's called NTLM reflection, alter it, get the token, impersonate the token, and if the out-of-process COM server is running a system, you are system. There are some variants, because the original exploit worked only with Metasploit or Incognito. Me too, I wrote two standalone variants, but we had a problem because it was fixed. Port 666 was fixed, the object bits was fixed, and so it had, and it happened, if you disable this service or you firewall some port, this exploit wouldn't work. So with my friend, we tried to weaponize this exploit, and we produced what we call Juicy Potato. Juicy Potato allows you to configure everything. So you can choose the CLS ID of the out-of-process COM server you want to use, the port listener, the RPC port. For example, if you have a Windows machine under your control, you can reflect the authentication on your RPC server, and in the event viewer, you won't see nothing about authentication, very, very stealth, and so on. Other interesting, we produced a list of very, very interesting CLS IDs for each operating system. Some of them are very interesting because they impersonate the user logged on the first session. If domain admin is logged on, I can impersonate domain admin. Okay, these are the settings an ideal service should have for exploiting it. Okay, and this is our tool. You can download it here, and there is also a variant of Metasploit. It has been ported also as a Metasploit module. These are some examples of CLS IDs. Okay. I have a video, but I will skip it. You trust in what I'm saying. A video about exploiting this, okay? So, how can we stop this? I asked Microsoft more than 1 year ago, and Microsoft responded, in the current implementation model, we are not able to stop this. This is very, very bad, okay? So, it continues work. Can we do something? Not so much. Obviously, protect sensitive accounts, that is the best, and disable unnecessary services. But for the defense side, there is good news, but because finally, Microsoft was able to fix it in version 1809 of Windows 10 and in version 2019 of Windows Server. So, but if you have Windows 2016 Server or Windows version minor than 1809, this exploit works. So if you have this privilege, you are automatically system, and that's very, very bad. Final thoughts? Obviously, never underestimate these privileges. This is what I told you. This patch works only on newer versions, older version, and there are plenty of Windows 2016 servers. It continues to work. Maybe there are other privileges not so well known we can abuse from. And as a side note, it has nothing to do with privileges. I don't know how many of you knew that for more than 1 year, there was a service which was misconfigured, starting from certain Windows versions, which grant full control to a service account. So, as you can see, if you compromise a service account using the orchestrator service, it was possible to gain system access, and this lasted for more than 1 year. We notified it with my team to Microsoft, and finally, in the September Patch Tuesday update, they fixed it. Okay? Okay, that's all. I hope you enjoyed my talk, and sorry for not having, but time was tyranny. Okay? Any questions? Everything is clear? Well, thank you again.